I first formed the Newtown Neurotics, little did I know that the band would chart a course through the beginning of the end of everything I knew of my world. From Thatcher to Brexit, the welfare state that nurtured my generation was gradually being destroyed. In 1975, I was lost and confused. I had to do something positive in my life, so I became we, and this is what we did.
Let's kick out the Tories, the rulers of this land, for they are the enemies of the British working man. And it shows when that bastard is in, unemployment grows. It shows from top step down to the crumbling road. Let's overthrow them soon. Can't you see what they're trying to do? Overthrow them soon. Can't you see what they're trying to do? Well, I'll be frying soon. Can't you see what they're trying to do? They just abuse their power.
Now here's one. This is about our town. This is Newtown people.
Harlow was an example of social engineering. It had no historical blueprint, it was just constructed from scratch. It's a construct which tries to create an environment from the word go that is beneficial to the people that live within it. Forward planning, pre-planning. It was meant to create a human environment for people to grow up and to work in. It was built with the idea that buildings reflect people's own psychological development. First 5 years of my life, I grew up in Finsbury Park. And the reason for that was my mum was working at Coss's Electronics, and they were encouraged to move to this new town that had just been built outside of London. They offered a brand new home to the workers who were prepared to actually leave London and set up home in this new town. I was isolated from the sense of history, because in Harlow there was a lack of it. This was entirely a different environment altogether, and an environment waiting for punk to happen.
They are punk rockers, the new craze, they tell me.
When it was announced on television on the Bill Grundy show that they were going to have a band called the Sex Pistols on after the commercial break, you know, there's nothing sort of grand to be said about I knew at that moment that this was going to be something special. But for definite, I was inspired. I didn't know what it meant, but it was fascinating to think that I was going to try and find out now. And I pulled the guitar out from underneath my bed, which had been laying there gathering dust after I'd given up through boredom, but things had changed.
Youth culture is relatively, in the modern sense of the term, is relatively new still in the 1970s. It moved very quickly, passed through a series of styles and fashions, moved from the Teds, the mods and the skinheads, and then onto punk. And youth culture became very important as a space, really, for young people to shape their own identities, to reflect on the world of which they were part. Punk kind of tore a hole in the cultural fabric a little bit, really. It allowed for people to give it a go.
The first punk band to form in Harlow was not the Neurotics, unfortunately, but maybe that's the way it was meant to be, because the first band was called the Sods, and they, straight off the bat, were fantastic.
I think we'd got going in maybe 78, back end of 77 maybe. We managed to see the Sex Pistols playing at the 100 Club with the Damned supporting them before they got into sort of Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood's clothes, and they were really wearing safety pins, you know, and that was the thing that sort of started it off. I guess we brought it back to Harlow, if you like, you know, sort of cut my hair and never wore a pair of flared trousers ever in my life again, you know. It was that idea anyone can do it, yeah? You didn't have to be a fancy musician, you didn't have to be able to do that. You didn't even have to have a venue. You could just do it and, you know, blag gig somewhere and do that. So I think that was probably going on all around the country.
I was aware of Colin here and there. We weren't close friends to begin with, but we used to bump into each other at festivals. I mean, festivals was a big thing for us. We liked the concept of open-air festivals so much that we went to every one that was on. But it was really punk where we bonded as close friends. He looked fantastic, and if you're going to form a band, you really couldn't do better than getting someone in like Colin. He was tall, lanky. He looked more handsome than any of the current punk stars at the time. The next thing, I suppose, is almost inevitable that, because he was a good-looking guy, I wanted to be in a band, that my thoughts would coalesce around that. We all decided we were going to go and see the Ramones at the Rainbow, the New Year's Eve gig. It was so electric. With them, everything was easy. It simplified the idea of a band down to the absolute nuts and bolts, which in themselves, without the rest of the machinery around them, was exciting in itself. The ideas I was thinking about maybe forming some sort of band just couldn't be kept down any longer. And I said to Colin, play bass. He said, I've never played bass in my life. And I said, well, don't worry about that. You're tall, thin, handsome, you look great, I'm sure you'll be fine.
And I spent days just listening to this Ramones album, and it was sort of like, well, if Dee Dee can play that, I can play that, surely. You know, I'd never picked one up before in my life, never even tried to play the guitar, six-string, you know.
Unfortunately, what there was at the time in Harlow was a real shortage of drummers. You couldn't find a drummer for love or money. At the time, there were probably 10, 12 bands in Harlow and about 2 drummers, yeah? So the same drummers played in nearly all of the bands because you couldn't kind of get them.
Now, the Sods were going from strength to strength, and they suggested that why don't you come and do a support slot rather than just say no because we haven't got a drummer and miss out. They would do a very simple set with just me and Colin. It turned out differently from that because we borrowed a drummer to do a gig, and the gig was organised by Tiggy, who, after that one gig we did, became our full-time drummer.
Yeah, they looked like the Ramones, dressed in their leather jackets. At that time, with me living in the villages, we didn't really see punks walking about. So when I done that gig at the village hall, they brought a lot of support with them, and there was a lot of punks, you know, about in the pubs before the gig and after the gig. So yeah, I loved it. I thought they were great.
Tiggy was very much a bit of a comedian. He was forever raucously laughing about next to nothing, and got very, very drunk. The Neurotics that originally formed were completely different from the Neurotics that were to later be. I mean, we were all just up for the crack. The early Neurotics gigs was awash with beer. Most of the time we played drunk. We weren't taking it seriously. We were just having a bit of fun. And Tiggy seemed to fit that entirely. His drumming was very punk simplistic, which was great. Visually looked a complete character. Everyone knew him. He was larger than life. And it seemed like just exactly what we were looking for. We started trying to get gigs in Harlow, and it was impossible because there wasn't anywhere. The only way we could play was to play out of Harlow.
We played at polytechnics, backs of lorries, blew the roof off at the local village hall.
The venues themselves, they weren't even venues, you know. There were no stages, there was no lighting. It was really hard work, but we sort of had fun because it was such hard work, kind of triumphed out the adversary of it all.
And no matter how ramshackle or rough and ready it was, the one thing you knew for definite, it was ours.
We all tended to go to each other's gigs. So the back line was the band and the front line was the audience. Later on, as it grew, the front line kind of took on its own sort of identity. And they'd be people that we'd go on marches with, they'd be people that we drank with. But as the bands got bigger and the Neurotics grew in popularity, so the front line took on a bit of a life of its own, really.
They were an unpredictable and crazy bunch. And you was never even really sure whether they actually liked the band. Some of them were so crazy that their idea of supporting the band would be to abuse us. But they were always there for us. It was an anti-audience in the sense that they reacted in a different way. They would always be there. The next stage of playing live centred round the Triad in Bishop Stortford, which was the first time we'd had the opportunity to be invited to play a gig and not have to build it or hire our own PA in. What they did provide was a venue in which our punk scene coalesced because we couldn't do it in Harlow.
Welcome you to the circus. This one is about your drinking habits. It's called licensing hours.
I think the first time I actually saw them was we played on the same bill at the Triad Centre in Bishop Stortford, which was like a mecca for all the local bands, and we just trooped up on the same bill at one point, and they were sort of a bit different from the other bands that were around at the time, a little bit more musically articulate than the 1, 2, 3, 4 Bosch kind of thing.
We put a demo together and we had this idea to send it off to Small Wonder because we had admired a number of releases that they'd put out in the past and we felt this was a natural home for us. So we were a bit miffed when we got turned down by the label. And as a result of that, we had to think of another way of getting our music out. So we decided to form our own label. So keen were we to hear what we sounded like in these early days that we made sure that each gig was recorded off of the desk. I decided to make a compilation of them. We called it Piss of the Newt. We'd just get a bunch of us around in my flat and we would sit there all night with beers and just stick labels onto cassettes.
It became a collective, and we all just chipped in what we could. I was working in a print works, I think, at the time, and we'd go out with posters and buckets of flour and water paste, slapping the posters up, whereas these days you put it out on social media.
Once we'd done that, we started thinking about what our next move would be. It became evident pretty soon that Tiggy's dad wasn't short of a bob or two, and he approached his father about lending us some money to make the single. We sourced the recording studio, which just turned out to be the one that we'd use throughout our career. Whilst we were waiting for the records to be pressed and returned to us, Margaret Thatcher came to power. And the first thing she did with immediate effect was to increase VAT. The pressing plant got back to us and said that there was no way we were going to get these records until we had paid the extra VAT. Thatcher had made an enemy of us from the word go. The mysterious world of record labels or A&R people or any of that, we had no knowledge. And there was only one person we knew, and we knew where he was, and that was John Peel. All three of us stomped down to Broadcasting House. We descended upon him like birds of prey and gave him the single. It went into his hand as quickly as we could get it. We made sure he was hanging on to it and said, "You got to play it." I turned round to the others and said, "It's going in the bin, isn't it?" "Yeah, it's going in the bin." At the end of every rehearsal, we'd trot downstairs and we'd have a cup of tea before making the journey home. And the radio was on in the background. What is that? My head sort of turned inside out. It's just when these weird moments when your brain is trying to make sense of something and you lose all sense of reality for a moment until it's like tracked down what this external thing is. Shut up. We're on the fucking radio. The idea that our sound had reached out to to more ears than we, at that point, had ever played to. It was so powerful. It was a memory that you could never forget.
I used to go up to Small Wonder Records in Walthamstow a lot, run by this funny little hippie guy, Pete Stennett. I remember going up to get the second Newtown Neurotics single when the oil runs out, and he did this funny thing pretending to go downstairs and look for it and then just appear behind the counter with it. And I think that second single was when you felt and you could hear that band becoming something bigger than just maybe a punk band.
One, two, three, four.
Just go by the counting on the tape.
About the fat men who wear their slippers to drive their cars. And while their machines are running, they won't walk very far. They never realise what they've got, and one day they will lose a lot because of what's gonna happen when the buses don't run, and what's gonna happen when the winter comes. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do when the oil runs out?
The production values on that record really pulled that sound out. The lyrical flow of it was a time of the oil crisis, rising prices and all the rest of it. It really brought you into the politics of today.
The stuff that they were talking about, they were ahead of their time. When the oil runs out was so direct to the problem of oil consumption and how we interact with our everyday life with that particular resource. A radical notion to even be thinking about how we print paper or how we drive our cars or whatever.
As a scene, as it were, all the people within the punk scene at that time all used to congregate in the Harlow Playhouse foyer bar. And one day we're all sitting around there. In come somebody who looked peculiar. He come in, he's got a shock of curly hair, and I looked at him, and we all looked at him, and because we were cynic corner, as it were, we would start taking the piss out of him. He sort of got himself a drink and then come over and started talking to us, and that was the first time we ever met Attila the Stockbroker.
All around, they never make the DJ sound because the senile programmers get the bird if they hear an idea or a naughty word. So all we get to pass the days are endless boring pop cliches like shake your booty on the floor, hang your wombat out the door, want that flounder, hit that place, wrap that turbot round my face, save your love because the girl is mine, get right down, it's disco time, okay y'all, oh no I'm alright, the heavy sound on a Saturday night. And then on top of that powerful stuff, if you didn't think that was rough enough, the daytime DJs cap the lot, they should be rounded up and shot. If you want to hear a real baboon, try Steve Wright in the afternoon, the biggest fruit bat of them all. He'll really drive you up the wall like a plug old clog with pubic hair. Young Mr. Wright clogs up the air, and everyone can surely see that he needs a lobotomy. There's one man got the feel, it's true. Good old John Peel, he talks to you, but most of the rest are as bland as can be with a taste of attention, a flare of a flea. So stuff it, Radio 1. The happy sound that's really dumb. Bring back the pirates, they had class, and stick your programmes up your arse. Thank you.
I started as Attila in 1980, so I'd seen the Neurotics. I was already, getting on the way to doing poetry, and I was enthused by the Harlow punk scene, the kind of energy, and above all, the kind of very, very close nature of the scene here really inspired me. But there was so much stuff going on. All my early gigs, all my early kind of, if you like, when I was coming out from was here.
After spending time talking to Attila the Stockbroker, my feelings in the end slowly turned into the socialist that I am today. Attila encouraged me to express those ideas, and particularly philosophical ideas within my songs.
I think the early music was more socially conscious than party political. Definitely with Attila's influence, I think it became more party political. We were all very much on the left, but all for different reasons, really.
One of my favourite books of all time is a philosophical work called The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, the French philosopher. Sisyphus was a poor guy who was condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up to the top of a mountain and then roll down the other side. In the act of doing that, he should find his satisfaction. In other words, that life has its ups and downs, quite literally. But it's a manifesto for optimism and for self-confidence. Now, I've always been blessed with that, and Steve's very different. Steve, I don't have a self-doubt gene. I'm incredibly lucky. I don't know how it is, but I managed to communicate some of that to Steve. What I said to Steve was, look, all these ideas, you've got all these ideas. You're young, you're working class, you're living in a new town. Don't bottle it up. Stick it in your song. Say what you believe. Have the confidence to come out with your ideas. Don't think, oh, I can't say that because I'm just a guy from Harlow who left school at 16. Just, you're intelligent, you're creative. Use the ideas that you've got, put them in songs, and he just did it, and he did it fantastically and brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. Present people with something they can believe in, they will respond to it.
It struck me that I did want to do something that wasn't just lyrics about getting drunk and falling over and things. I wanted to do little esoteric things with lyrics, play with them. It was an interesting form to try and put ideas across within a song. Don't leave it with just a bunch of connecting sentences that just make up something with a chorus, but to actually create its own little world in which an idea is expressed.
Scene 1, take 2.
Kick Out the Tories began its life as a thrown together Christmas song.
I went to a party. I had a couple lagers. I smoked another motor. I felt like a laughter.
Band was invited to play a TUC Kick Out the Tories demo. So I quickly took the chord sequence of the Christmas song, quickly wrote some simple lyrics that were easy to understand in the open air with a simple theme.
Let's kick out the Tories, the rulers of this land, for they are the enemies of the British working man.
I was quite prepared on that day after we'd finished playing it to turn my back on it and walk away from something that I felt could not be of any use whatsoever because it took virtually no time at all to put together. And I was used to agonising over every part of the melody and every word that I put into my songs. Whenever we played, they called out for it, and so we carried on playing it, and 39 years later, it's still our most popular and requested song. We continued getting better and more organised as a band. My writing was becoming more sophisticated and development of our skills with our instruments was moving apace. But what we was finding was that Tiggy wasn't making the same transition. We found that he could play absolutely brilliant some nights, and other nights he was nowhere near that. So every time we played, it was always hit and miss. But Tiggy was suffering from some sort of allergy that he had on his hands, and it made all his fingers sore, which was the worst thing that you could have as a drummer. There were times he physically couldn't drum. It was too painful for him to drum. We come to a conclusion with that and the fact that he tended to drink very heavily, so that made him unpredictable as well. So for a long while we realised that we needed a change, but we'd struggled so hard before to get a drummer that we were terrified that if we called it a day with Tiggy, we might not find anyone. But in the end, he started playing with a new romantic band as well as in the Neurotics, and in those days that was sort of like heresy, really. When I turned around and said to him, I'm sorry, Tig, but we're going to be looking for another drummer, he just thought to himself, well, I'm a bit hurt, but that means I can focus on my other band. We didn't realise that things were going to catch up with us so quickly. And in the end, it became a race against time to get a settled drummer in to be able to present ourselves to the press focus that we had managed to achieve for ourselves.
I mean, everyone was aware of the Newtown Neurotics, obviously, and as a 14, 15-year-old kind of just getting into music, it was kind of, they were the biggest thing on the local scene, so everyone would kind of know of them. And at that age of, 14, 15, you got quite in awe of people like that. And, we used to go to Star Time Records, which was the local record shop at the time, and kind of wait for Steve on a Saturday to turn up so that we could kind of take a glimpse of Steve. And then shortly after that, Steve said, do you fancy trying out with us? And at the time, I remember thinking, I'm just sitting in for them until they find someone. And I hadn't really, at that point, realised I was auditioning for them.
I felt he'd be everything we wanted him to be, and he would be really closely integrated into our view and our vision. We went to him and said, we want you to join. Said he never forgot the day that he got accepted, and we broke open a bottle of pomade. That's how much money we had. And he wasn't even old enough to drink.
Obviously, I was absolutely delighted, but I was kind of doing my O-levels, and then suddenly found myself in the kind of the most popular band on the local scene, and still partly learning how to play as well, which was the weirdest part about it. I wasn't still a fully formed drummer then.
You couldn't see him over the drums. He was so small. People thought the drums were playing themselves because you couldn't see the person behind it. It was so funny.
Thanks a lot.
CNT Records, who had just formed and were looking around for bands for their roster. John Langford, who was the artistic director of CNT, he had heard Kick Out the Tories and wanted to put it out. And the interesting thing for me was I thought that he would say, yeah, give us that track, we'll put it out as a single. But he said, no, I want you to go into the studio and re-record it. And of course, Simon come in at a time when the recording session was almost upon us. So not only did he have to learn our set, but he had to become good. But he managed to get just exactly what we needed.
For me, that was the start of kind of like a much more, focused and aggressive, sort of more hardline politics in music than had really existed during the first couple of waves of punk rock. People really got their shit together, really using the power of music to have a really positive message. The Neurotics, they were like the Ramones with really direct, practical, socialist politics.
I'll tell you what, if the Ramones had come from Harlow, they'd have written Kick Out the Tories. It's just that opening, let's kick out the Tories! Oh God, it's so stirring.
These words, let's kick out the Tories, in 5 words, that single summed up, I think, how every single person felt at that time. I defy anybody not to want to punch the air and go out and do something.
At the time, there were a lot of bands singing about Thatcher, 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 the hatred of Margaret Thatcher. You listen to Kick Out the Tories, there's not a mention of Mrs. Thatcher at all. It is no mention of her. It's the Tories and the press who are getting the stick, and mostly the press, quite rightly. What that means is the message becomes universal to a degree. I think that's the reason why that song has got such longevity, and why the band has such longevity, because they've got a universal message for our times.
It was so direct. It was so to the point. There was no, in some ways it's written from anger. It's a cry from the streets in a way, It's a cry that people want to hear, and it's like, and Kick Out the Tories is equally as relevant today as it was in 1980, 81.
Maybe the most frustrating thing about the Newtown Neurotics is that Kick Out the Tories is a song that you could have sung for nearly 30 out of the last 40 years, isn't it? I mean, it's depressingly apt now as it was then, isn't it? More so, isn't it? Now you look back at the Tories they were singing about, you think, oh God, they weren't as bad as the ones we got now, are they? It's like, they're going to have to re-record the song and make it louder.
I think Kick Out the Tories has now become a part of the zeitgeist over these many years. It was created not long after the Tories come to power, and it will outlive the Tories themselves. I decided that I needed to have a change. The skinhead or the cropped hair look was associated with people with low intelligence who supported the National Front. I wanted people to be able to stop seeing things in black and white and in stereotypes. I wanted people to understand that people's intelligence cannot be ascertained by the way they look. Everyone's different. Don't take people at face value. And the shock of the visualisation of singing songs that appear to be in direct opposite to the way you look, to me was a great idea to play with.
Just the three of them up there doing it, and it's just the noise they made for three blokes was just so impressive and so stirring. I mean, what they were saying was important, but the sound and also the image was so visceral that you couldn't fail to be stirred by it, really.
Steve's a really striking presence, isn't he, for a start? And Colin moved around quite a lot, but in that really cool sort of, you know, the rule of bass playing, the lower the bass guitar, the cooler the band, you know, the higher the bass guitar, up here, level 42, terrible, down here, you know, the Ramones and Jesus and Mary Chain, brilliant. And Colin had his bass right down here and just looks really, really good. But the sound, the drive really came from Simon at the back, because that clack of his drums. And then bang, you know, then they were off.
That left-wing image was like a magnet for the National Front, and pretty soon we was finding that we were having threats from them of coming and smashing up our gigs. There come a point when I realised that the decision to actually stand up and be counted was bringing some unintended consequences.
Most bands back in the early 80s, all they had to worry about was getting a bad review in one of the music papers. The Neurotics were, you know, running the gauntlet of neo-Nazis at their gigs. You know, their critics wore jackboots. They were really putting themselves at risk. They were putting their lives at risk. And it came across in the music. They played as if their lives were depending on it. It really came across, particularly in the live performances.
If anyone ever says to me, do you get nervous before gigs? I say, what, now? You know, I'm doing nice gigs in pubs or in art centres or whatever, you know. When I started off, I was literally often performing to drunk punks and skins, some of whom were boneheads, some of whom were fascists. I had things thrown at me, I've had darts thrown at me, I've had a dustbin thrown at me, and I got death threats. Steve got them too. It was incredible.
The politics was part of the show rather than a show with politics. And I think it's interesting to say, you know, it might sound a bit naive, but going to shows like that, you did feel like you were part of something. And you can argue that doing something as daft as going to a pop concert doesn't change that, you know, and I guess it doesn't in some ways, but on a personal level, it can raise a lot of awareness, and it can, you know, certainly shape how you view things. It certainly did in my case.
We courted it in a way because of our political stance, our openly political stance. Skunks was a kind of well-known, it was in a pub called the Blue Coat Boy in Islington. It was kind of a well-known right-wing hangout. I don't know why they asked us to play, but we accepted the gig, and we knew that potentially there could be trouble. And I remember going up in the van thinking, Jesus, you know, this is scary. And but Steve and Attila were determined to do it, even though they knew that they were potentially on for a hiding here. They were determined that we would go and do this gig, and we would stand there and we would stand firm in front of these people. And as it happened, there was big trouble, and there was a massive fight that they laid into Attila on stage. And I will never forget that. And it was kind of, to me, it was an awakening of, right, here we are, this is what it's about. It's us against them. You know, and we got, you know, and we have to stand firm. And Attila and Steve taught me how to do that.
We were a kind of a unit, and the people that loved us respected that. And they, you know, yeah, Attila the Stockbroker and the Newtown Neurotics, we did so many gigs together, and it was brilliant. It really worked. It was just like, you know, this is something different. And we were prepared, this was the point, we were prepared to stand up and say, this is what we're going to do. I mean, that gig, that Skunks gig where we got attacked, I mean, it was a pub infested with Nazis.
You're sort of really up there as a target. If you haven't got fans and you've got detractors in your audience, it can be absolutely terrifying. But also coupled with the idea that we can't let them get their own way.
There was a general feeling that if someone heard any rumour of trouble, you know, some people would be dotted around the audience who could snuff it out pretty quickly, you know. I think so. I think in some cases people got scared out of the building before they started, before they could start a fight. But the whole thing about the gigs was just turning up and, you could go on your own, but you were never on your own because there'd always be, particularly at the London gigs, particularly the Greyhound gigs and places like that, there'd always be someone there that you knew. Or if you didn't, someone that you'd end up talking to. I think that was a great thing about standing in the Neurotics audience was you were instantly, you had something in common, you had a kind of idea of the world. It felt like a bit of a gang in the audience, obviously with some very familiar faces. They used to be there all the time.
There's something about music that brings people together, and in a political context, that coming together is an act of solidarity. You come to a Billy Bragg gig or a Neurotics gig, and you should leave with your activism charge. You should feel the warmth of the audience for the ideas that are being expressed from the stage and think, okay, I'm not the only person in my town who gives a shit about this stuff.
After the miners brought down Ted Heath in 1974, that defeat stuck in the craw of Tory rising star Margaret Thatcher, and so when she became Prime Minister in 1979, one of the first things she did was to plan for the smashing of the trade union movement by going for the strongest union, the National Union of Mine Workers. Beat them, and she was convinced she could destroy trade unionism completely. This set the foundations for provocative proposals to close down many British coal mines, which gave the miners no option than to strike to defend themselves. The miners' strike was an earthquake within the society that we'd grown up in. It was like a gauntlet that had been thrown down, that we had no alternative but to challenge and to fight back as best we can. It seemed quite natural to me to just roll up our sleeves and get stuck in.
The miners' strike was very important for the country in general, but music definitely. And I think what was different was you chose a side, which Neurotics already had done. So, there was a difference between bands actually backed up what they were saying by gigging, and it wasn't just playing music, it was also physically supporting things as well. And I think any serious level of struggle is always cultural as much as political as well, which I think Neurotics definitely knew and know now as well.
If you consider that we just come out of our teens and we're still trying to make sense of the world in all its madness, we now got a lesson in the way things actually worked. We realised that the entire power of the state was bearing down upon these communities and anyone supporting them. If you got in the way of them, it was going to be a dangerous thing.
There was a whole group of us who were willing to step up for the miners. It's one of those opportunities where you actually get to, instead of talking about it, actually get to do it by stepping up in support of people who are involved in a struggle. It was a long year, a long strike, and for most of us it was a real political education.
People that were involved back then weren't in it for the money. There was no money. We were in it because we believed in it, and it was a movement. It was simply the passion in politics, music, poetry, and a kind of an alternative.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Porky the Poet.
I started gigging and working with the Neurotics quite often. I was on bills with them regularly. There were lots of benefit gigs, and so it was quite ordinary to see poets or comedians jumping up, So the idea of quite off-kilter people opening for bands was sort of ordinary. They weren't easy gigs, but they were fun.
The driving force behind all of it, I suppose, was Thatcherism and a rejection of it. And that's really what bound us all together in a sense, was this kind of collective rejection of neoliberal Thatcher policy.
She defines the decade of the 1980s in literally from 79 to 90. She kind of is the predominant political face, voice and image of the period. So she defines it and she defines the reaction to it. Almost a kind of big mother 1984 figure, really, of someone enforcing unemployment, engaging in war. It was in the air, that our notion that we were kind of turning into a war state in some ways, and things like the miners' strike, the riots of '81 just gave credence to that. Again, if people thought the 70s were conflicted and the 80s took it to another level, really.
The Thatcher government, which seemed like this unstoppable machine, had given so much power to the police, and it was like the government was saying, don't even think about trying to stop us, because we are so powerful, we can act in this way, we can act legally, we can have illegal wars, and then we'll go and win elections on the back of it.
It was a political movement. It was not necessarily entirely political, but radicalised, in that it wasn't just young people wandering around with swastika armbands and spitting. It was people saying, no, this is wrong and we want this. It was Thatcher that basically made me a left-wing punk. Thatcher turned a generation into political punks.
One of the things that grew up during that period was ranting poets. And, of course, Attila the Stockbroker was in the middle of that. And because of the close association between myself, the Neurotics, and Attila, we were inspired by that form of communication.
Yeah, we liked doing everything together. It was good. We were a good team. All of us were a good team. The idea of it is kind of a punk thing in itself, I suppose. The idea of taking poetry away from, kind of the elite and taking it onto the street, which is what these guys were doing. I just think the whole thing kind of just gelled and kind of blended really nicely with what we were doing. In terms of an audience coming to a gig and seeing a ranting poet on, it was kind of, I think it was great. These people bringing poetry back home or bringing it back to street level, if you like.
Being a poet is almost taking the kind of punk idea of just get up and do it to its end point, isn't it? You don't even need any equipment. You need some words and an idea, and you need to put them together, and you're up and running. Poetry and punk, it was all of them were kind of culture distilled to a kind of their creative basics. Get up, do it. If you've got something to say it.
What the ranting poets had in common with punk was having something to say and getting up and saying it in a very blunt and forthright way. I think punk was very much a rejection of how flabby and uninspiring popular music had become, and ranting poetry was like a rejection of how boring and elitist poetry was.
What we did together is something that I'm incredibly proud of. We both are. And the crowning glory of it is the song that we did together, Andy's a Corporatist, Mindless Violence, about this fascist bonehead who changes and becomes an anti-fascist. And we put it, and again, don't preach to the converted, we put it on an Oi album, got us a load of shit, got me a load of shit from the far right, but the number of people, if I had a pint for every person that's come up to me and said, Tilla, when I was 15, I was this really stupid little kid who didn't have any idea at all, and I said I was a Nazi bonehead, and then I heard that track on that Oi album, and it completely changed the way I thought about everything. Thank you. If I had a pint for every person that said that, I would be completely paralytic for about a month. Master's dream. After our friendship developed with Billy Bragg, he was due to return to East Germany, in which he'd already gigged previously.
And I'd been over there in '86 to play at the Festival des Politischen Lieders, the Festival of Political Music, and wanted to go back. I'd made some good contacts there, enough to be able to sort of come back with the Neurotics and Attila the Stockbroker. And together we were able to do a ramshackle rock and roll tour, the like of which I don't think any of us had ever experienced before.
Throughout the Neurotics days, Colin and I were permanently, we were all pretty skint, but particularly me and Colin, we were signing on at the time. And we arrive in the DDR and we hook up with our interpreter, who then hands Attila kind of a wad of money. I mean, it was like the biggest wad of money I've ever seen. And it was just heaps and heaps of money. We couldn't do anything with. We could spend it there, but we couldn't bring it home. We were walking around with money in our pockets that most people wouldn't see, you know, in 6 months of working. So it was it was kind of weird. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, we'll be back on the ferry completely skint again. And what happened there?
To arrive in East Germany and be given thousands of East German marks was a bit of a shock. More money than we could actually spend, because in East Germany there wasn't a lot of things we could spend our money on, considering that while we were playing there, all our beer was paid for, all our meals were paid for. There wasn't anything we needed to buy, and the shops didn't have very much in, so we ended up like tipping toilet attendants and various people with big wads of money. And then, taking a step back, we realised that we looked like bloated Western pop stars just throwing money everywhere we went. We had to readjust ourselves while we were there to be able to cope with this.
Going through the Berlin Wall was a little bit like going through the looking glass. It was into a country that was out of time, that existed in a state of frozen political ideology. If you tour around the UK, the secret police aren't really interested in what you're doing. But if you turn around East Germany, you're sure as hell those strange guys hanging around at the sound check are not the promoters' reps. And when we started to push against it, they sent us to a place called Suhl in the south of East Germany, which is renowned for being where the Secret Service training school is. And they knew that the audience down there would behave itself, because we wanted to play to people who were responding to our music rather than people who were responding to the party line.
The trip was a real eye-opener, and we shared a lot of time talking about what it was like to live as ordinary people in East Germany. You know, one-to-one, we got on really well and discussed our differences and the differences between our worlds. They hadn't had a proper punk movement. There were some punks around, but it was illegal, so you didn't see many of them. So when the Neurotics appeared for the first time in East Germany, the crowd was enormous. There were thousands of people, because they simply didn't believe that the East German government would allow a punk band to appear on stage.
The people in the East first were really surprised to see them because they didn't look punk. Jeans, T-shirt, that's it. And you had these East German punks with their black leather jackets and everything. What? Why don't you have that? And I remember that Colin said, punk, you're not punk here. Punk, you're here. And I really liked that.
Every band, every artist who wanted to perform had to perform in front of this commission first, and they decided if they get this license or not. And of course, the music was important, but more important were the words, what you were singing. If there was anything against the system, of course, they didn't give you the license, and you were not to perform in the public.
We had people taking pictures of our bottles of beer next to our feet. It was such a big thing. The power of that was beyond our comprehension. It was such an overwhelming response.
It was really something special. It started raining during the concert, but nobody cared about it. It was, everybody went crazy about the music and danced and enjoyed, and nobody believed that this kind of thing could happen in the public in East Germany. So that was just great.
But a day after we were down playing in Secret Police Town was a day off. So we convinced the people who were driving us around to drive us back to Berlin, and we found somewhere to actually do an impromptu gig in proper pop-up punk style in the canteen of some sort of student union place. We just turned up, plugged in and played. We had microphones and a PA, but no mic stands. So Steve had to be the human mic stand for me.
It was just madness. We just let all of our inhibitions out, and the students just loved every minute of it. That show of fun was considered to be illegal because it wasn't sanctified by the East German state capitalist regime at the time.
There were members of the security service undercover in these concerts. Today we know this, that they were there. That was the situation for East German punk bands and underground bands.
You know that you're bucking authority. You don't often see the tentacles of authority trying to hold you back. Stasi in East Germany were so used to getting their way that they didn't pretend about it. In fact, part of the threat was that they were visible. You know, I can remember our translator telling me, so that bloke in the tracksuit, yeah, he's the guy I've got to report to tell about what we did yesterday. So I'm going to tell him this, this, and this. He said, OK. I said, yeah, that's fine, George. You have to do what you have to do, mate. I don't want to get you in trouble. And sadly, we did get him into trouble because he got recalled into the army as a result of us messing around. So we were punking out and doing our thing, but we went home at the end of it, and Jörg didn't. He went back in the army.
They sent me for 3 months back into the army, into the reserve force. The only thing that I regretted was that you had to cut off a beard and had to get a haircut. I could live with that. And Billy and the Neurotics and other bands always recharged my batteries with their being here and giving us and sharing their music with us that I could put up with 3 months.
It's constantly throwing you a curveball because this is a version of socialism. And if it doesn't match up to your idea of socialism, and let me tell you, it doesn't. It really doesn't, because it wasn't socialism, it was totalitarianism. You're constantly like, seeing stuff, thinking this ain't right, Whereas, if you're a punk band touring in East Germany, it's like being a rock and roll band. You can get anything you want. So, when we were in East Germany, it kind of, those of us who were more politically inclined were focusing in on that. Colin was a bit more rock and roll than usual. And I think that Simon was sort of between the two. Sometimes he got the politics of it, sometimes it was the rock and roll.
Fantastic time, and as a youngster, it was just mind-blowing. Playing to that many people. I think it was at one of the gigs at the Political Song Festival. There was like 10,000 people there. So, it was kind of, it was mind-blowing. I was so nervous. I remember my stomach being in knots prior to the gig. But yeah, it was what a privilege. What a privilege to be able to do something like that. And when my kids are now discussing East Germany in school, to be able to say, well, we were there. We were there 2-3 months before the wall came down.
In 1988, we were preparing to return once again for a summer festival in which we would be headlining, and suddenly, just before that, Colin fell really ill. We were concerned about his health and also concerned that it was, would he recover in time for us to go and do this tour? Because of the nature of it, it's not something you can pull out of and then expect to get back again. These were moments in time, and it felt like that we couldn't let this go through our grasp, but at the same time, our good friend and musician was ill, and it tugged at us whether we should just make a big show of solidarity and say, no, Colin's ill, we're staying here, or the unthinkable, to go and have someone else play bass for us.
Steve made an executive decision that he didn't think that it was safe to take Colin with us just in case he got ill while we were away. Colin, I know, wanted to do it, but Steve believed that it was too risky. So we said to Colin that we were going to replace him for the tour, and Colin obviously reluctantly agreed.
We brought into the band Mac, who played in lots of bands, and he said that he could learn 30 songs in about 3 days.
The scary phone call when Steve said, you play bass, don't you? Yeah. Do you want to play bass for us because Colin's ill? Yeah, brilliant. When? We're going to East Germany in 3 days' time. You need to learn 30 songs. Even if I hadn't been able to do it, I would have said, yes, I'm doing it.
Just a little while ago, our bass player, Colin, fell ill, very ill with bronchitis, and we had to find someone to help us out to be here, to be able to be here tonight. And so we found Mac, who, for this European tour we're doing, has had to learn 30 songs in 3 days. So I'd like you to give him a round of applause for that. Sehr, sehr schwierig.
I mean, East Germany, to me, that was a fantastic time, going over there, and it wasn't just the fact that you got to pretend you were a bit of a rock star, because nice hotels. I was, 20, I think at the time, so I'm a 20-year-old Essex punk, all of a sudden being put in 5-star hotels and given great food and everything sorted on stage and massive window. It's very, very easy to think, whoa, I'm a bit of a rock star here, and you have to keep your ego in check because you're not.
They had a concert in the same venue where I had the very first concert when I met them, and the first person which walked in was Mac, the new bass player, and I didn't know it by then. And the same moment when I saw Mac, I knew something was wrong with Colin. And then Steve told me, Colin had to stay at home because he's really sick.
And when we came back, everything was supposed to go back to normal. Colin was supposed to be better, but he turned up one day for rehearsal and said that he was quitting.
Being on the road is not exactly a healthy thing. You drink too much, you smoke too much, you eat too much shit food, you stay up far too late. I mean, it is a real strain on the system, especially the way we were. I mean, we'd cultivated this on-stage persona of being serious politicos, and then off-stage, we were like mad lunatics, just having fun all the time.
It was. I remember the day actually. It was a real shock to me, and so then me and Steve then had to make a decision on what we were going to do, and I think we both agreed that the Neurotics couldn't continue without Colin. That it wouldn't be the Neurotics without him.
Our very last final Neurotics gig, and I'd just like to introduce the members of the band as it stands at the moment. There's Stupid here on drums. Hello. There's myself, and this here is Mac. Rockabilly. It's not just a rockabilly.
He's a loony lefty.
He's a loony lefty rockabilly.
And tonight we're going to play a clutch full of songs from some of our black and vinyl spinny discs. In 2 sets, aren't we?
Yeah.
2 sets.
3 hours. We're going to do a Springsteen type set of all the numbers that we've ever done.
Anyway,
the thing is that everyone...
And me as well.
Oh, yeah.
And me till it's not broken too.
Focus on T-shirt.
Yeah, we're wearing them in unison today, aren't we? Yours is pink. Mine not come out in solidarity with the Tillers.
It's a very, very sad occasion for me too, I must say, after 10 years of tremendously close association with these, with 2/3 of them.
We deny it all. It's close, but not that close.
So, as you can imagine...
And there was a queue round the block at the Fulham Greyhound, and I was about number 50 in the queue. Rather hacked off that they started the first song as the doors opened, which meant I'd have missed the first 3 songs by the time I got in. But, they only had a certain amount of time. And they played for hours on end, and it was terrific, a great show. And at the end of it, I was sat on the curb outside the Fulham Greyhound with Steve Lamacq, crying our eyes out because it was the last time we'd see him. Great show.
The thing about the Fulham Greyhound gig, which I really remember, is actually not even at the gig. It's 2 days later. I'm back in the New Musical Express offices because I'm supposed to be reviewing the gig for the NME. This band was such a big part of my life. I don't know how to put into 350 words, what they meant to me, and how sad it is that they've split up. And this was the last gig, and it was a really quite emotional night. As much as you want it to be a celebration, which it kind of was, it's also very sad at the same time, really. So I think it's a really strange thing. As much as you're all together, everyone's having their own experience of what it's like.
For a while, my energies went into the new band, The Indestructible Beat, and all in all, it turned out to be exactly what I wanted to achieve. It was a great mixture of the two forms, the African and the punk rock. We recorded a really great album as well, but it never got released because the band just fell to pieces. I was exhausted. I'd spent most of the 10 years that I had been in the first part of the Neurotics trying to hold down a physical job and also write music, gig, everything that's associated with being in a band. It was so intense and I was getting so little sleep that I was getting dissatisfied in a way in what I was missing. And I'd spent so long being angry, just didn't seem to have a filter to stop it from getting to me. Quite frankly, I'd had enough. Yeah. And it's a bit. Now, that's a pair of mine. Let's have a look at this. This is this was after the Neurotics. And when I started playing with the band I formed after Neurotics, The Indestructible Beat, these were just a pair of sunglasses that I got for 20 pence on a boot sale. Yeah, I used to zip it up and then walk around like this all the time. When I bought this, it was brand new. It spans the entire 80s Neurotics. It's been through so much with me that it's almost a part of me. They're completely worn out. Everything's worn out on it. Listen, hang on a minute. There is something in here. What's that? Oh, I wouldn't like to say what that was. No, I won't get those out. But yeah, I didn't know they were in there. Ancient history.
The Neurotics were very much with the No Wonder label. That was their baby, their own particular label, and they released all their stuff through that. On the other side of it, you had Stalkbeat. Most people made cassettes, but we decided making records was possible, so we did it. I just went out and borrowed the money and made 500 copies. Billy Meadows, who was the Gangsters singer and writer, he put together this double album, believe it or not, of material from Stalkbeat, and so in order to launch that, we pulled together the remaining members from the bands and see if they could still do it in 2004.
I was approached to donate a couple of early Neurotics tracks. I couldn't imagine doing all the rehearsals and trying to get the band together to play a competent set. But then it was reasoned that it would be in the spirit of punk and it would be in the spirit of celebrating what we'd achieved all those years back, and it would be in the spirit of things. And that reasoning, I just could not deny it. It made absolute perfect sense. We took the stage, we started playing and was warmly received, and it turned out to be a resounding victory for us.
It was fantastic, it was great. And to hear the songs again, it was, Colin got up and did a bit as well. It was fantastic night. After it finished, I kind of felt that to get back together again, like it would kind of diminish what we did, what we'd achieved. I was always very anti-reform of any band. I kind of just felt it never felt right to me when bands reformed. What's the point of it? I couldn't work out in my head what the point of it would be. And so I kind of said to Steve, look, I'm out, But I've got absolutely no problem with you continuing and doing it with another rhythm section if that's what you want to do.
The nature of the split was based on an understanding within the band that if anyone lost interest in playing within the Neurotics, then we would cease to exist. I thought, OK, we're at the end. What I didn't know is that that line would be rubbed out quite soon by a chance meeting with two new people.
The Square was going through a kind of managerial change at the time, and one of the big decisions was to get rid of alcohol sales. So that's when it was really focused on the youth centre kind of side of things. So there was one last gig booked before the alcohol ban came in, so it was kind of like, that's going to be the big night, everyone's going to be there, drink the bars dry, give the venue a send-off. Steve was asked to play it, he got asked to do a solo spot, and Dave and I spoke about it and we realised it was going to be like a pretty big night for the town. It was going to sell out anyway. So we said, approached Steve and said, you're going to be stood up there on your own, just you and a guitar, that's fine, but we know the songs, do you fancy us coming up and backing you for a couple of songs? And he was up for the idea. It wasn't billed as the Newtown Neurotics, there was no aspirations really to do much more. It was just a bit of fun for me and Dave, playing songs that we liked, backing the guy that wrote them.
So on the night we did that, and I was surprised just how good they played. They obviously knew the stuff and loved the stuff because it come together really easy.
One of the things that actually made it a bit nerve-wracking for me, being the first time playing those songs, is that Colin Dredd was there as well. He wasn't well enough to play, but he was there in attendance, and I'd be playing along, looking down at him, and all he used to ever say to me after was just, look more like you're into it, enjoy it more. And there I am kind of thinking, these are your songs, and but that made my kind of position in the band as official as you can get.
What was so good about this new Neurotics lineup is that both of the guys were a lot younger than me, and their youthful enthusiasm with the music brought the tempo and the dynamics of it back up to the early days of the Neurotics and put me on my toes. Lots of people who spoke to us after the gigs seemed to think that the two guys were my sons.
Getting offers of gigs was a contrast to kind of what we had experienced being in our own bands, where you're kind of begging, trying to muddle your way through contact lists, trying to find gigs. So when Steve said, we had an offer, and these offers were good gigs, and then these offers were suddenly like, have you got your passport? Do you want to come abroad? And we hadn't experienced any of that in any of the bands that we played in, so yeah, it got really exciting time.
We ended up playing more gigs, more variety of gigs in different parts of the world to more people than we'd ever done in the 80s. We were back with a vengeance.
Last time I played here, I said the band were going to split. Well, they sort of did, but we are the Newtown Neurotics.
This lineup lasted for 5 years. Then, out of the blue, fate intervened.
My son, Oliver, said to me, I'm over going to get to see you play. And I kind of thought, I don't know. And so I kind of fired an email off to Steve and sort of said, well, you know what, time's right.
People always like to see as many original members of the band as possible. So we had Simon for that. And then we had the influence of having a younger bass player, and by this time, after 5 years playing bass with the Neurotics, he had become the de facto bass player in the Neurotics.
And it was really exciting as well, because the first gig that we had with Simon back in a seat was at the 100 Club. So it was kind of like, Simon's back, we're playing this legendary venue, this is it now, let's go.
If you're going to have a political band, you've got to be very careful that you don't become all just politics. Well, you need someone in the band who believes 100% in rock and roll. And that's who Colin was. He was that bloke who, as far as he was concerned, he was in the greatest rock and roll band in the world. Leave Steve to worry about all the politics. Leave Steve to worry about putting across the message. He was the other edge of that, like Mick Jones and Joe Strummer, One of them was a spokesman, the other one was a rock and roll star.
Colin took the more more passive role in the band. Although he was equally politically minded, he kind of did like the rock and roll element of it. Yeah, definitely, without shadow of a doubt.
The way I remember him always, because he used to sing backing vocals for Steve, is that. It's like him, like that. And he'd pull his jaw in, like that. He had this really odd facial expression. He'd shut his eyes and pull his jaw in, like that, over the mic. And he was so thin and angular. And he had that hair.
I bought a bass guitar when I was a kid. I mean, I got as far as learning the first Ramones album, and that's as far as I got, but just the way he stood on stage and everything. So I suppose out of all the bands, he was going to be, you know, the one that you looked up to as, if I was in a band, I'd probably hope to be a bit like him, you know.
Normally when this happens, the BBC puts this thing up called a test card or something, like a little thing going around and going, and this voice comes down and goes, we apologise for the delay, it'll be solved soon as, you know. And they're all sweating in the back room trying to get the tape together. You can't do that like this, you have to watch it.
Colin had reached a point in his life where he was kind of a bit of almost a recluse. So Steve did his best to bring him out of that, and we'd have an annual meet at Steve's birthday every year. So every year we'd get to see each other and we'd talk about the old times, and it was great. And you know, for me that was my point of staying in touch with Colin. And you know, when we got back in the room together, it was like yesterday. You know, it was like no time had passed whatsoever. We had tons to say to each other.
There's an interview on our website that we did, and it always makes me laugh every time. I said something like, you know, we're gonna release Kick Out the Tories, right? And that one signal alone would dispose the Tory government. And
yeah, right.
And then I said, and then it's going to go on to be a big hit, and we're going to earn £2.75
and sandwiches.
£2.75 for it. And then Colin says, "What, each?" I didn't realise what was going on in his life that he didn't mention, and there was a lot of things he didn't mention. He kept a lot to himself. It began to occur to me that he probably was suffering bouts of depression or ill health. So there was distance between us, enough for things to happen without me realising.
That was Colin Drake there on bass. Colin Drake, give a round of applause. He's an original. They broke them out.
I was completely shocked when I found that he was going in to hospital to try and sort this condition out for good. It turned out that he had an infection that just could not be beat, and there was nothing left to do. Because in these situations, you don't really know what to say. But I thought, I have these get well cards. So I can only imagine as I read all these well wishes and such inspirational feedback, and people were telling him how much he meant to them in their lives.
Quite sad, really. I saw him on the day before he died, and went up to the hospital because Steve had contacted me and said he's not a well boy, you know. And I kind of went up there and went to see him, and he had difficulty talking. He had a oxygen mask over his face, and I said to him, you can't die because I've got a bet on that our bass player is also very unhealthy. I've got a bet on that he's going to die before you, you know, so you're not allowed to die, which he laughed at, you know, even with the oxygen mask on. Then I got a text from Steve the next day, and he just said, "Kev, you lost your bet," which was really sad, you know, really sad.
It was a very hard thing to deal with for both of us. Yeah, and it took me quite a while to get over it, and yeah, I still think about him quite often. Yeah, he was a good friend.
Steve told me that Colin is really sick, and I wanted to go over there, and he said, no, you won't have a chance to see him. And then I said, shit, I just go over there, and I booked the ticket, and 10 minutes later I got a message that he died. But what I could do before, Steve asked all his friends to write cards and write letters and send him things, and I thought maybe a letter won't make it. So I wrote a letter and I scanned it and sent it to Steve. And Steve later told me that my letter was the only one Colin wanted to read by himself, and took in his hands and tried to read it. And it was really, wow.
Colin had become so entwined with my being that I didn't even realise what it would feel like when that space wasn't being filled anymore. I think both of us fully understood what we meant to each other. What Colin's death did, it not only built up a resolve in us to continue, but it also made us realise we needed to reflect society now. In some way, noting the effects that this neoliberal ideology has on real people. Our humanity has been crushed. Not our fight, but it's being poisoned. New material needs to reflect that.
This burning earth, this crimson sky. Hey! They hold our flakes of black and ash lights, blocking out the light while others drown in torrential rain. Hey! No farming can be done in this, and our crops have failed again. What we do to this earth, we do unto ourselves, while we're trying to deny how bad it's gonna be. We're living through a crisis, a climate emergencies, a climate emergencies, a climate emergency, emergency. Whoa, 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 whoa. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you?
Back then, we were angry, young, feisty. We were driving forward the whole time, and we had to be doing something. We had to be doing this. You had to be singing, to be in the press. You had to have a record out. You had to be doing gigs. You had to be doing this, and you had to keep driving forward. We don't have to do that now. And to be honest with you, I think for me it makes it so much more enjoyable to be able to do it this way round, because we're simply doing it because we enjoy doing it now. What with the kind of political climate that we're in again now, it's right that we should be doing this. There needs to be a resurgence of rebellion, if you like. It's more important now than it ever was. It was the best years of my life. I met so many brilliant people. I learned so much, went to so many fantastic places. It was an absolute honour to be able to do it.
We'll never give up. I think that was always something. It was always part of the Neurotics manifesto, if you like, was, well, just don't give up. Here's a different way. It's an alternative way. This is a more positive way. That's a pretty good argument to put forward.
Great ideas never die, nor do great songs. So to have the Neurotics back and playing again and reminding us of, you know, the struggles that we fought and won, and engaging now at a time, I would argue, of even greater political urgency, it's really great to have them back. I mean, I think of the bands that I used to play with, you know, how we might need them now. But the Neurotics are back, and they're angry, and they're looking for you.
People want authenticity. People want to connect with things that are honestly felt and expressed. They're fed up with being lied to. In good times, this is a beautiful world. And I think it's worth spending your life trying to make it better.
Was living in a new town, and I had problems with employment. So I moved on up to London town, where they said things were all happening. Going down, living in a bedsit, fucking the tube trains, sleeping all day long. And you know what, 'cause you don't go out, 'cause you got no work, you just watch television, living with unemployment. I ain't got a job, and there's no work in the city. They always try to blame it on the blacks, but it's really those in power who stab you in the back. Fucking the tube trains, sleeping all day long. And now you know no one, 'cause you don't go out, 'cause you got no work, you just watch television, living with unemployment. Well, round our way, we ain't got a lot. And after 4 years on the dole, I thought I'd been left to rot. But now I've joined the army and, believe it or not, I'm gonna know for no longer. I'm gonna get shot. we're living in a bedsit. We're back in the tube train, sleeping all day long. And you don't know what, cause you don't go out, cause you got no work, you just watch the